The Chicago Bulls get destroyed at Madison Square Garden, losing their second game in a row to start the new year. We're going to talk a little bit about that game. We're also going to debunk some Bulls narratives that have started, I think going a little bit too far in the wrong direction. Talk about the Bulls' big man rotation and the returns from injuries we could see on Friday. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Sir Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the content for today. And yeah, we have a full post-game recap up on the channel from yesterday's game where the Bulls got absolutely destroyed by the New York Knicks, specifically in the second half of the game. When you look at it, the Bulls were a very competitive first half, where the Bulls shot 46% overall from the field and 47% from three-point range. That flipped in the second half of this game, where they shot 37% from field goal range and 33% from three-point range. So right there, it just wasn't the Bulls' night in the second half of this game. They just didn't have it. The defense fell off dramatically. They had a 99 defensive rating in the first half of the game. They ended up finishing with a 119 defensive rating. So that defense considerably fell off for the Chicago Bulls in the second half of this game. We got out-rebounded. The lack of size really came down and really hurt the Bulls a lot down the stretch of this game. And ultimately, the Bulls just did not have enough to win this game when it came down to it. The New York Knicks made adjustments in the second half that, we called. If you guys were in the halftime hangout, I said Tom Thibodeau is going to make some considerable adjustments in the second half of this game, and how Billy Donovan reacts to those adjustments is going to really be telling to how well the Bulls can really stay in this game. And it just did not go in the Chicago Bulls' favor at all by any stretch of the imagination. It was bad in every stretch of in every facet of the game in the second half of the Chicago Bulls. We got out-rebounded. The turnovers hurt us. They got 21 points off turnovers. They got more second chance points than us, more bench points than us. All the things. All the things. It just did not go the route for the Chicago Bulls in last night's game. And you got to look at it. The second half from DeMar DeRozan, he only took 3 shots. 3 shots. That's not typically what we see from DeMar DeRozan, and that's not typically how the impact that he has on the game. Kobe White's shooting stroke came back, especially in the second half. He was 3 for 4 for three-point range. He finishes the game making 6 3-pointers, so that's good to see that Kobe White's shot came back, right, and how that can help the Bulls going forward. But when you look at it, like Andre Drummond did the best that he can out there. We just didn't have the big man depth. Terry Taylor didn't play terrible, but he definitely got outworked by size. And so at the end of the day, it's just the Bulls' injuries caught up with them. And and I get it, next man up mentality, all that type of thing. But at some point, you just can only go so far with the next man up. It's just what it is. And so the Bulls just, unfortunately, got out-coached, got outclassed, got outworked. Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, we just had no answers for them in the second half of this game. When you look at it, even though the Bulls went into came out of the first half with the lead, in the second half of the game, the New York Knicks scored 65 total points, whereas the Bulls scored 45. So it all worked out in the Knicks' favor, and the Bulls they didn't have enough. They didn't play. They didn't execute well enough. They didn't adjust coaching-wise well enough to win this game, and the Bulls deserve to lose this game. They now fall to 0-2 on the season. We got the Charlotte Hornets coming up, 2 games against them. Maybe those are get-right games for the Chicago Bulls, but specifically I want to talk about that 23-9 run in the final 8 minutes. That's what completely took the Bulls' chances of winning out this game. They actually kept it pretty close, even with the defense kind of falling off in the second half of the game as well. I think they got the lead down to like 2 at one point early in the fourth, but then that run in the fourth quarter, it just took over. And so when you have Jalen Brunson scoring 31 points efficiently, you got Julius Randle scoring 35 points, the Bulls really didn't have any type of answers or any secondary scores or anything like that to really step in for the Bulls when they needed it the most. And that's just what it goes to, man. It's an unfortunate loss. It's not a loss that any of us want to see, right? I guess if you're pulling some positives out of it, it's good that Kobe White shooting it came back. He had 8 assists, 4 rebounds on top of those 23 points. DeMar DeRozan still had 28 points, even though he only took 3 shots in the second half of the game, but to get to the free throw line pretty consistently as well. It's just listen, the Bulls didn't have enough. The New York Knicks are a better team. They played better. They executed better. They did everything, all the things better than the Chicago Bulls in this game. And when that happens to you, it's unfortunate. Like I said, don't get me wrong, it's definitely not what we want to see from this team, but it's what we got. And I think you can only, we can only do so much. And unfortunately, the Chicago Bulls got outworked yesterday. And got outworked meaningfully. And so that was a team that all their starters scoring in double digits, really good. Didn't have really anybody that necessarily killed you off the bench because some of their bench players is in the starting lineup just like ours. But, the Bulls, unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Bad games from Javon Carter was absolutely terrible. Patrick Williams was terrible offensively, did some things defensively that were solid, but was bad offensively in this game. And like I said, Terry Taylor getting outworked considerably. Adama Sanogo and Julian Phillips only play a combined 3 minutes. So, that question on will Billy Donovan go to the young guys considering the injuries got answered. The answer was a fuck no. So, when it comes down to those things, man, the Bulls just they didn't execute. They didn't deserve to win that game. We didn't play well enough to even really to try to win that game. And that's unfortunate when it comes down to it. But hey, injuries did catch up with the Bulls, and that kind of gets us to the next thing. I want to debunk some things that are going on and kind of talked about right now with the Chicago Bulls. And one of the things first is Zach LaVine. Now, do not get me wrong. Zach LaVine was playing bad before he went out. But now there's kind of this narrative, this overcorrection of the narrative that, oh, Zach LaVine is terrible. He can't help this team win. What are you talking about? Like, when it comes down to it, this is the thing. Zach LaVine, much like Nikola Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan were to start the season, was shooting a career low on almost everything. And so one of the things with Zach is that you don't expect him to shoot that much of a career low, right? That's just not what you expect. And so I think that the narrative now has turned to this thing where it's like Zach LaVine's this horrible basketball player and that he can never do anything to help the Chicago Bulls. And even the things of saying Zach LaVine's a ball hog, like that's a lazy ass, I think statement to throw towards Zach LaVine. That's not to say that he's not a flawed player. That's not to say that his basketball IQ hasn't hurt the Bulls down the stretch. That's not to say that he takes some boneheaded shots at times. That's not to say those things, but I think like there's been an overcorrection on the narrative around Zach LaVine, and now that he's making his return back soon, that overstatement on some of his negatives has like deterred from the fact that Zach LaVine can help this basketball team. Yes, it comes down to Zach being willing to buy in. Absolutely. But we can't just say that that's not something that can happen. We've seen LaVine lock in before, and I think now if Zach LaVine is motivated upon his return, whether it be to up the trade value or whether it just be to, hey, these guys been playing pretty damn good without me. Let me go ahead and get back to what I can be, right? Whatever that is, I think that can help the Chicago Bulls. I'm not willing to say either that, just automatically, yes, it's going to happen. But when you look at the reality of it, Zach LaVine was shooting his career low from three-point shooting range. The career low. Let's keep that in mind. He also was shooting one of the worst field goal shooting percentages basically since his rookie year, outside of the year he first came back from his ACL injury. He did only shoot the ball 38% over those 24 games. But as far as being healthy, that's what it is. Career lows again. So you would hope that there's some regression to the mean in that case, meaning that Zach LaVine gets back to more what is his career averages, which is 38% from three-point range, almost a 40% shooter. He was also a 46% shooter overall from the field. So those things can help the Bulls. Now, you do want to see Zach LaVine come back and lock in with what this team is doing, and there are legitimate questions to be had about that. But to just say that Zach LaVine's this horrible basketball player that in no shape, form, or fashion can help the Chicago Bulls get back on track and win some games, I'm sorry, but that's just an overstatement. I understand why some of you guys feel this way, especially with how well the Chicago Bulls were playing without Zach LaVine. Do not get me wrong. That improvement was real. We've talked about it. The reason why that happened, you got more, the ball's being spread around more. You got more players involved. They're more engaged in the offense, things like that. And Zach LaVine needs to come in and try to fit into what we have rather than be the system. Absolutely. But if he does that, there's no room. There's no way that you can't say that Zach LaVine can't help the Chicago Bulls. The biggest question is, will he? And that's the question that I have, not that if he has the capability to. Now, as well, DeMar DeRozan, you got to look at DeMar DeRozan in this game a little bit as well. Like, what's going to happen with DeMar? I think the way that he's been playing has been really good for the Chicago Bulls. But, you have this thing around him where, like, he slows the offense down. Well, sometimes you need to slow it down because the Bulls just aren't getting off shots. So that's another thing that you got to look at as well. And so, at the end of the day, if you act like Zach LaVine just can't help this team, I just can't get with that. Now, as far as another thing that we need to debunk, the big man rotation. Right now, the Bulls have seen a huge drop-off in the production that they get from their backup center. When you look at the fact that Andre Drummond's in the starting lineup, and the next guys following him up are basically G League level guys. Terry Taylor is a guy that fights and competes, and I give him credit for what he's able to do rebounding-wise at his size. I give him credit for that. But he's absolutely still a player that's the back end of a bench player for a reason. Now, I understand, too, People saying, well, then play Adama Sanogo. The fact of the matter is this still, Adama Sanogo is an undrafted rookie, and there's still going to be a fall off. Now, can he get to the point? I do think that Adama Sanogo can be a very good backup center in this league. By what I've seen from him in the G League, we just need to see it be consistent. But I do think that there's a possibility but the huge fall off now that we have in productivity off the bench isn't just even at the big man position. You got to look at what we're doing as well. Dalen Terry now is playing meaningful minutes for the Chicago Bulls. And while, like I say about Adama Sanogo, I'm glad Dalen Terry's getting some minutes because you're seeing him start to kind of the game slow down on him a little bit more, him understanding a little bit more how to go about it. But that's still a huge fall off from what the veteran in Torrey Craig was able to give us. It just is. Then you got Javon Carter playing like absolute dog water out there. So, like, when it comes down to it, right now, our bench that we came into the season expecting Ayo, Alex Caruso, Andre Drummond, Torrey Craig being the biggest players coming off the bench for the Chicago Bulls. Two of those are gone. Andre Drummond's in the starting lineup. Alex Caruso's in the starting lineup as well. That only leaves Ayo Dosunmu out there from what's supposed to be our bench rotation. Everybody else is supposed to be back of the end bench guys. And there's something to be said about how those injuries are affecting the Chicago Bulls and the struggles that we're seeing right now from the team. And that's not to say that Torrey Craig was everything for the Bulls. Nobody's acting like he's a superstar level player, but there is something to say when you have a veteran out there that you know even if his shot's not falling, he's giving you really good defense and communication. We don't have that from a player like Dalen Terry, even though, like I said, I want to see Dalen Terry get some consistent minutes. It's just that you have to understand that even with that said, no matter how high you are on Dalen Terry or not, there is a fall off going from Torrey Craig to Dalen Terry playing a lot of minutes for you in that rotation. And so right now the Bulls are being affected by that. That does not mean that they still can't win games. That does not mean that they don't still need to execute. Those things are still true. But we have to, those are just realities that you have to come off for it. And losing Torrey Craig's versatility off the bench is a real thing for the Chicago Bulls. Because I would say this, if even with Nikola Vucevic being out, if Torrey Craig was still in this game, or not injured and in for this team, he'd be playing some small ball five, and at least he can stretch the floor, fight, do some things like that, and it'd be a much better production than what for example, Terry Taylor's giving you. So I think there are some things that are really going on with the Chicago Bulls team, and lack of versatility, the injuries, those are definitely part of it. And the Bulls right now, they fell down to the 11th seed. Now, when you look at it, we're only a half game back from being back in that final play-in spot. We're 5 games back theoretically of the 9th and 8th and 9th seed, basically. And so when it comes down to it, over the last half of the season, it's appearing to come down to the Nets, Hawks, Bulls, and maybe the Raptors to fight over basically 3 playoff spots. And, could the Bulls go even higher than that? Yeah, we got a weak schedule. We get players back from injury. Zach LaVine comes back, and he's rocking with the Chicago Bulls. If Nikola Vucevic comes back healthy and we get back on that run and how we were playing, yeah, we can maybe even pass that. But right now, what I'm saying is the Bulls are a half game back of that final play-in spot, which they can get right back into, and then they're 5 games back of the 8th and 9th seed. So those are the teams that you're looking at really competing with, because so many people are asking of the Nets, the Hawks, the Bulls, and like I said, maybe the Raptors. The reason why I have the Raptors as a maybe on this list is because are the Raptors trying to win this year? That's one of the questions you have to ask after that trade. Like, the Raptors may have packed it in and just said, hey, we'll see you guys next year. But they may not as well, because they got some players that can absolutely contribute right now. They've won their last 2 games, so maybe there's something to be said about that. But the Charlotte Hornets, that's a team that's only won 8 games. The Washington Wizards, Detroit Pistons, those are teams that are all kind of out of it at this point in time. But the Raptors, the Bulls, the Hawks, the Brooklyn Nets, maybe you can even throw in the New York Knicks in there as well, just because, yes, they've won their last 2 games since the trade. But they're sitting there at the 8th seed, so maybe you can throw them in there. Maybe one of those teams fall off because of injuries or something like that. But that's where the Bulls sit right now. And it's more than easy. When you look at the Chicago Bulls, they have the easiest schedule remaining in the NBA. The easiest. It went from the 3rd easiest to the easiest. The only other teams with easier schedules close to the Bulls are the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Orlando Magic, both teams which are playoff teams and towards the top of their conferences right now, which is funny enough. Also, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Boston Celtics. Again, sometimes the rich get richer. But the Chicago Bulls have a very easy schedule per the strength of schedule right now. And so this is a time where, with injuries, with players coming back from injuries, things like that, the Bulls can make up some considerable ground here coming up. But it really does come down to what happens. We only played 10 of our 15 games this month at the United Center. Away from the United Center. We only play 5 games at home over the month of December. So this is, while it is an easier schedule for the Chicago Bulls, the Bulls are going to still have some tests over that time. And if they can come out of this month with being close to 500, the sky's really the limit, and a big part of that comes back to the injuries and the players that we have coming back. And we got even more news from Billy Donovan on that, on both Zach and Vooch. So according to Billy Donovan, that Zach went through the final intense workout with the Windy City Bulls yesterday, and that he cleared that. Now, the biggest question on if he's going to be able to return against the Hornets comes down to how he feels after that workout. So, we'll see how he feels today, how he feels Friday morning. That can determine whether that Zach LaVine returns, but it seems like all things are gearing towards Zach LaVine returning for the Chicago Bulls on Friday because he did clear that last hurdle. And then you got Nikola Vucevic. Started off yesterday hearing that Nikola Vucevic really didn't have a timeline, but that changed actually yesterday. So it looks like he progressed in the running department and came out of that workout really good. So a more defined timetable will be figured out over the next few days, he said. So that leaves the door open as well for Nikola Vucevic to return Friday. So Friday could be a day of returns for the Chicago Bulls, both from Zach LaVine and from Nikola Vucevic, and how they return. Well, we've seen how Vooch fits in with the new way that the Chicago Bulls are trying to play. If Zach LaVine comes in and continues that as well for this Bulls team, you are then looking at a team that is getting players back while their schedule is getting easier. Yes, they'll be on the road, but if Zach LaVine can come in this, I'm not putting everything on Zach because, again, the Bulls have to play well regardless of that. Kobe White has to get back to shooting the three ball well to add some spacing to that floor. But in adding another 20-point per game scorer in Zach LaVine, it's going to theoretically make things easier on the players out there. Now, we need to still see the players be aggressive. And that's one of the biggest questions is how does the return of Zach LaVine affect everyone else, right? And that's something that the Bulls also have to look at themselves is in bringing Zach LaVine back, does it create more of a headache or does it help clear up some of the pictures of what you want and maybe even that trade deadline aspect? So, like I've said before, everything really is helped with what the Bulls are trying to do by Zach LaVine coming back and playing well. The biggest question is, will he accept that role of trying to fit into this team and not being the guy? And that's not to say that anybody else should be the guy. I think that this Bulls team and what we're seeing right now, the best outcome for it is to not have the guy. Is to have a team that's playing as a team, moving the ball around. The offense can come from anybody because players are moving without the ball. I think that's the best version of what we can get from this Bulls team. And so we got to hope for that. And so hearing that Zach LaVine is could be making his return back, I think that's a good thing for the Chicago Bulls. And it could be a bad thing depending on how he tries to fit in. But I hope that Zach is now set there on the sideline, has seen the way this team played, has seen the questions around his play, and he comes back and tries to kill it. And I don't mean by kill it by just shooting a bunch of shots to try to score, but comes back and says, "Nah, I'm about to be an efficient player. I'm about to try to prove some of these doubters wrong." And hopefully that we see that from Zach LaVine. And I think that motivated Zach coming back to this team. It is, man. And that's to his credit, Billy Donovan said that. Billy Donovan said that it seems like Zach LaVine has the right mindset. Said this. Obviously, I talk to him in the building pretty regularly. And I think whatever he can do to help the team has kind of been his mentality. It always has been. I think he sees now how we're playing and what we're doing. And the thing he would want to do is come in and contribute and make it better. And so if Zach LaVine does that, if that's not just empty words and empty statements, and Zach LaVine really does want to come back and help this team in the way that they're playing and help execute, it can help the Bulls so much. That's why I wanted to debunk that from so many Bulls fans that are now acting like Zach LaVine is Paul Zipser. And he's not. Zach LaVine is a talented offensive player that has his flaws defensively, more off-ball than on-ball defensively, but has his flaws. But Zach LaVine right now coming back and playing well is the best scenario for the Bulls. Even if you do still want to see Zach LaVine traded, which I still do think is the most likely outcome in all of this, Zach LaVine coming back then can get you more depth pieces and assets to help this team, but he has to come back when it comes down to it. So we'll see. We'll see. And, Zach LaVine coming back, finding his way, could be really big for the Chicago Bulls team and can help us, go in the direction that we want to go. And so we'll ultimately see what comes down with that. Now, with that said, before we leave, man, we're heading closer and closer to the trade deadline. We're 11 days away from that January 15th deadline that so many people kind of harping on. I don't know how active the Bulls or any team's going to be at that January 15th deadline, but we go back to what we've been hearing again, right? To kind of recap that Zach LaVine's trade market, I think the last word that was used for, the last buzzword was barren for Zach LaVine. Teams are still interested in Alex Caruso. Teams are still interested in Andre Drummond. That kind of makes into what their contracts are. And so when it comes down to it is that, the Bulls are going to have to make some decisions here at the trade deadline, especially if Zach LaVine's trade market is as low as what people are saying, and he's just not a player that seems like he's going to be moved. If he's not going to be moved, then do the Bulls look to move some other players? Like I said a couple of episodes ago, with the contract extension to DeMar DeRozan, do they look to move DeMar to get anything back for DeMar DeRozan? That's a question, that the front office has to ask themselves, right? You got to think, like, is a second-round pick worth it? Because that may be the most of what you can get. Maybe some you have to get contract filler, right? Salary filler. But, the Bulls have to ask themselves that. So it's a lot of, hopefully, clarity that comes over this last stretch going through March, right? This month of January for the Chicago Bulls. And we'll be talking about it all here, man. But, hopefully, Friday we're talking about some returns. That would be a really big story to hear Zach LaVine is making his return on Friday against the Charlotte Hornets and to see how he fits in. Because, listen, Kobe White's a different player now. Kobe White is a different player now, and he's been giving a facsimile of what Zach LaVine gave the Bulls when he was playing at his best. And so now they can potentially have two dynamic players at the guard position who can score. It takes a head coach coaching very well to make that work together. And so we'll end up seeing, man. But let me know your guys' thought, as always, down below. If you're on the YouTube side, if you're on the podcast side, I'll tell you guys how to get your thoughts in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod on every social media platform. You can also send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.